All right, and I'm hoping everybody can hear me okay. So tonight I'm talking about the importance of a sense of safety. So this is the order I'm going to talk about things. At first, I'm going to define what I mean by safety, because it means different things to different people. I'm going to talk about why it matters. And then I'm going to talk about some signals that your child might give you if they are not feeling safe. So things to look for. Sometimes they're not so intuitive. And strategies for helping your child when they don't feel safe. And then thinking about how to make a safe environment for your child. So the first question is, why does a sense of safety matter? Why is this such an important thing? And I like to think about Maslow's hierarchy when I'm thinking about why it matters. Safety needs are right here at the bottom, like just over things like eating and shelter and being able to get sleep. So safety is the next level in Maslow's hierarchy. And the thing is that you can't do anything else unless you feel safe. So you're not going to feel like you belong, or people love you and need you, and you're also going to find it really hard to learn. And so safety is sort of that foundation. It's one of the foundations you need before anything else can really happen. So that's why it's important. It's important because it is what makes it possible for you to learn. So what do I mean when I'm talking about the sense of safety? The first thing, something's up. Sorry, my slides are jumping around in a way that I'm not expecting here. Okay, there we go. Sorry. I'm still new to Google Slides, so I'm not such a professional with it. So anyway, what does safe mean? So when people talk about safety, very often they're talking about things that we think of like, being, in a violent situation. That's clearly unsafe, right? So if your community is not a safe community, that's clearly something that makes a child feel unsafe. Maybe being bullied by other kids. We know these are things that are hard for kids and make them feel unsafe. Experiencing racism, or being in an unsafe neighborhood, living in foster care, any kind of physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, neglect, any kind of household dysfunction, living with a parent with mental illness, or an incarcerated relative, maybe a caregiver is being treated violently, substance abuse. These are all divorce. These are all things that we always, when we're thinking, when is a child feeling unsafe? These are things we go to. These are things we know are hard for kids, and make them feel unsafe. But there are other things actually that drive this feeling of a lack of safety. And to understand this, I'm going to talk about something called neuroception. And so there are different kinds of neuroception. There's inner neuroception. So this is knowing how your body is feeling inside, how, physiologically, what are you feeling like? Is your heart racing? Are you feeling agitated? Are your palms sweaty? What's going on inside? Or, is your heart beating slowly? Are you feeling really calm and things like that? These are inner feelings that your body is attuned to. There's also what's around you in the environment. So your perception of the sensory world around you, and that might help you feel safe or unsafe. If you're somebody who has a lot of sensory challenges, so maybe bright lights make you feel unsafe, or loud noises, things like that. These are things in your environment that might make you feel unsafe. And then likewise, when you are with other people, some people have a way of making you feel safe or unsafe. So your sense of connection with other people is something that can give you a feeling of safety. And these things all matter. These all work together to help you feel safe. So if you're feeling ill, for example, you might not feel so safe because your body isn't feeling well and you might be scared that something's going to happen. And so all of these factors matter. How your body's feeling inside, what the environment around you is telling you, and then your sense of connection with the people around you. So now I'm going to talk about what triggers a feeling of unsafety and therefore behaviors. So very often our kids will act out when they don't feel safe. So they may, something may happen in the environment that makes them feel very unsafe. A loud noise or, I don't know what, somebody comes by that they feel threatened by, things like that. So what kinds of things can lead to a child feeling unsafe? So there are many different areas. So some of it is your biology. So like I was talking about, if you're just wired to be a very sensitive person, like if you're, wired to be sensitive to light or to touch or to, to loud noises or, just the feeling of brushing on your skin, things like that. These are biological things that when you're in the wrong environment can trigger you to feel unsafe and then have a behavior that is telling people around you that you're feeling unsafe. The environment can make you feel unsafe. So I was just talking about environmental conditions. There's other things too, like, being outdoors in the woods for some people feels like a very safe place. For others, it might not feel like such a safe place. There's also things like ability. So if you're being asked to do something that you're bad at, and maybe you're on show. So an example would be a child who has a reading disability being asked to read out loud in front of the class. That would be something that might make them feel defensive or upset because they know they can't do what the teacher is asking them to do. Likewise, a feeling of disconnection from other people can also make kids feel unsafe. One of my favorite examples of this is early on when I have two kids who are on the autism spectrum, and my younger son was definitely a handful, and I was taught that when he was having a big behavior, I should just try to ignore it. And he could not stand that. He couldn't stand it when I just got very still and just tried to not react to what he was doing. And he would grab my face and pull it towards him and say, "Mom!" So he really, really wanted connection, and he felt that lack of connection, and it made him really, really upset. And then the last area here is just when you don't feel like you have agency over your world. So, very often kids are in a situation where everybody is telling them what to do and they don't have a lot of control over their world. And of course, as they grow older, then we give them more and more agency and ability to control their environment. But sometimes kids really want that sense of, hey, you know what, I can choose what outfit I want to wear today, or I want to eat this for breakfast, or, I want to do something that people aren't letting me do. So these are all things that can lead a kid to have a big behavior. And so, thinking about what's going on there, something I did not mention with biology, I talked about how you're wired, but there's also a sense of being healthy, for example. So if you don't feel good, then you might act out. And something I notice, especially this time of year, as spring pops in, is that allergies can actually lead kids to feel out of control. Like it's actually, allergists know that kids having big reactions can be an indication of allergies. So, there are all these health conditions that can lead kids to act out. And sometimes we don't think that it might be that. We might think it's something else. So I always tell people to look at health issues. Okay, so we're going to shift into talking about different brain states, okay? And there was this concept long ago in the 1960s called the Triune Brain. And they initially thought that there were these different regions of the brain that were responsible for things like survival or processing emotions or calm, rational thinking. But it turns out that they're actually complex networks. And so I used to have this great slide that had these different areas of the brain, but now I have networks of different brain areas here. So survival brain network is it's the part of your brain that keeps you alive. So, this is if you are being threatened by a bear, then you're going to move into what's called fight, flight, or freeze. But these are autopilot kinds of things. This is, your body does this very instinctually. So if a kid is moving into fight mode, very often it is like they're not in control of their behaviors. It's their survival brain kind of coming into play. And that's sort of the baseline brain state. So then there's the emotional brain, which is on top of the survival brain. So it's something that, if you're out of survival brain, then you've got this emotional brain, which is where we process emotions, memories, and habits. And these are instinctually based decisions, and they may have been trained over time. But this is where emotional thinking, so things like people comforting you, people yelling at you or whatever, like these are all things that are processed in your emotional brain. But you can rely on strategies you've learned in the past in situations like that. And then the last brain network that we're going to talk about is the thinking brain. And this is where complex thinking happens. And this is where all these brain regions are all working together. But the thinking brain is everything working together. So you can do things like understand what people are saying, process language. You can imagine things and think about, what is good, what is bad, abstract thinking, and just being aware of your environment. This is where reasoning and rational thought happens. And the thing to remember is that we move through these different states of regulation or dysregulation over time. So you can be in survival brain mode, and that's always going to be there if you're alive. But the other areas can be offline, and they come back online one by one. So you go from survival brain to emotional brain, and then your thinking brain comes online. So if your thinking brain is working, your emotional brain is also working, and your survival brain is also working. But you don't have a thinking brain without the survival brain. They go up like that. So Dan Siegel actually has this wonderful model of the brain. He calls it the hand model of the brain. So when you have your hand like that, like with the fingers over it, that's all three parts of the brain working together, okay? And then he talks about flipping your lid. So this is the frontal lobes, right? You flip your lid, and then your thumb represents the part of the brain that processes emotions and habits and memories. And so when that goes offline, then you're left with just your basic brain. This is a nice little model for kids to have of thinking about their brain going offline, right? So you start with everything being online, and then you flip your lid, then your emotional brain goes offline, you're surviving, then emotions come back, and then you go back to all parts of the brain working together. So when all three parts of the brain are working in harmony, then you can think clearly and so on, but that can only happen when we feel safe. And that's why it's so important to feel safe. You can't learn, you can't process language and so on unless you're feeling safe. So things that can help your child feel safe are things like them feeling good about themselves or feeling good about their environment and the people around them. Feeling good about connecting with other people with them, and also being able to do the things they want to do. So I talked about skills and connection and, how you are in your environment, whether your environment is supporting you. So there we go. So anyway, that was, this is not working the way I expected it to, I'm sorry. So, all right, we talked about this. Then, Safety is feeling at peace with the world, okay? So just thinking about how you feel when you feel peaceful. This is when all parts of your brain and all of your body is working together in synchrony to work. So now we're going to move into the third part of the talk, which is, how do I know if my child is not feeling safe? So what kinds of things can we look for in our kids? So we've got our little girl here, and she very clearly is not feeling very safe, and it's very clear. But there are other symptoms that may be not so obvious to us. This one's pretty clear, but it's not always so obvious. So remember, I talked about the thinking brain, the emotional brain, and the survival brain. I'm going to talk you through this thing that's called the rumble rage recovery cycle, which Brenda Smith Miles first came up with many years ago in a book that is now titled High Functioning Autism in Difficult Moments. It's gone through several iterations as the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual has been updated with different labels of things. But anyway, she came up with this idea of this rumble rage recovery cycle for describing how autistic people go through the process. And the thing that I have come to learn over the years is this isn't just about autism, this is about everybody. So everybody goes through rumble rage cycle. So let me just explain what I mean by that. So if you think about how high the curve is, that represents how dysregulated the person is. So when we're here in these teachable moments, all those parts of the brain are working together. Your thinking brain is working, your emotional brain is working, your survival brain is working. They're all working together. But if something happens, and that's represented by this first dotted line here, then your child might start to rumble, and their thinking brain is going to go offline. So you're going to flip your lid, and then you're left with your emotional brain and your survival brain working to make sure you're going to be okay. So an example of that might be if if you have a kid who's really sensitive to bright lights, for example, and you walk out the door and it's a really sunny day, then they might start rumbling and getting upset. And if you can figure out what's going on for them, maybe you have a hat or some sunglasses or something like that, put it back on, they're going to calm back down, and then their thinking brain will come back online and everything will be fine. But if you can't figure it out, and they keep getting more and more upset, eventually you cross over what I call the point of no return. And that is this second dotted line here. And you shift from the emotional brain into that survival brain. And again, this is fight, flight, or freeze. And so at this point, your kid can't think, and your kid can't really respond to the emotional things going on. So really all you can do is just make sure that everybody is safe when you're in the rage. And so rages can last different amounts of times. I mean, for some kid, a rage might last, I don't know, a couple of seconds. For other kids, literally, it can last days. So every kid is different, and every situation is different. So you may have a rage last a much longer time once, or then another time they might be much shorter. If you can avoid keeping yourself calm, if you can keep yourself calm then during all this, then eventually your kid will be able to start calming down, and you'll see them start moving back down. That out of control behavior will start slowly getting less and less dramatic, and eventually you'll pass this line here, and that emotional brain will come back online. And so you move into recovery. And during recovery, kids are very often, kids are different about what they look like in recovery, but sometimes what they look like is they feel terrible about what happened here in the rage, or when they were rumbling, they actually feel really bad about it, and then they want comfort from you, and so they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I can't believe I did that, and they want hugs, and they want to know you still love them and that it's okay. Other kids are really embarrassed, and they actually hide from you, so they might hide under a bed or something like that, and wait until their bodies calm down. And so their emotional brain is coming back online. And again, if you can avoid re-triggering things, eventually then that thinking brain is going to come back online, and you'll go back into being able to process language and think clearly about things and so on. So these are the phases of that rumble rage cycle. Now, I always say Brenda Smith-Miles was very kind to the adults when she put our adult curve down here really low. See how we hardly react as adults, but I think all of us know we can actually go right there with our kids, and it's very hard to not go right there because we're actually wired to respond in kind to the situation. This is just how we're wired. And so if you recognize that you're starting to rumble, you can implement strategies, because you're the grown-up, and do things to keep your own body calm and your own self calm. And if you can do that, your kid is going to calm down a whole lot faster. If you start rumbling and raging right along with them, then things are going to get a little bananas, and it's not going to be a whole lot of fun for anyone. But if you can manage to stay calm, relatively calm, your child actually does something I call borrowing your calm. They learn to be calm themselves because of this connection between people. Again, this neuroception between people. Then they borrow your calm, and eventually they recover, and they are calm too. So anyway, I love this rumble rage cycle as a way of thinking about what's going on when a child is dysregulated. The other thing I did want to mention is that some kids kind of go from calm to rage with no rumbling whatsoever. I often see that in kids who are very sensitive to rejection. There's a condition that's part of ADHD called rejection sensitive dysphoria, and a lot of kids who are perfectionists have trouble with this, where they perceive that maybe their parents don't like them if they don't do something perfectly, or they feel like they're not doing something perfectly, and then they just get upset, and it's like a flash. There's really not much of a rumble or a warning. And you have other kids who are like simmering, and they're, inside they're starting to rumble, but they're trying to stay calm, and then they can't do it anymore, and then they explode. So sometimes it looks like there's no rumble, but there may not be, or there may be. So this is a case of knowing your child and understanding how they are in that situation. So this graph here is talking about how neuroception, so your perception of the environment, your perception of the people you're with and your connection with them, and also your sense of your own body's internal state, and how you process all that information. When everything is working together, like I said, so you feel good, you feel like the environment is supporting you, and you feel like the people who are around you, or you're connected with them, then you're going to feel regulated, calm, and connected. But if one of those things isn't true, then you may get dysregulated. So you may see challenging behaviors and struggle if if you're feeling bad, or if the world isn't supporting you in some way, or the people around you aren't helping you feel safe. And so you want to think about how their autonomic nervous system, and I'm not going to define that, but that's just a term used in polyvagal theory, which is what this is all based on. And it's just how your body activates itself and then calms itself down. So freeze or shut down is what happens when your parasympathetic system is activated. But usually what happens is you first move into fight or flight. But if you realize that you can't run and fighting doesn't matter and you're going to get eaten by the bear, then you shift into freeze or shut down. And the thing is, we don't encounter a whole lot of bears in the world anymore, but our nervous system actually doesn't know the difference. So in the modern world, we can feel threatened and shift into freeze or shut down. And one reason I wanted to bring this up is that sometimes kids are so scared that they just freeze. And people often say that those kids have they're well behaved. And I learned this partly from my own children. I have a freezer and I have a flight kid. So one of my kids, whenever he's threatened, he will run away. So if something is not going well, he's out of there. But my other son, who everybody always said was a dream and really well behaved, it took me until he was in late middle school to realize he was actually shutting down when he was scared. And he never went through fight or flight. He just froze. And so I always feel like I need to mention that, because I think that, it's easy for the kids who fight or run to get supports, but the freezers actually need support too, because they don't feel safe. And the other thing I did want to mention too about those reactions, and I did say it earlier, but I just want to repeat it here. These are not under kids' control. So this is not something that they are choosing to do. My son who froze was not a good kid. He was freezing. My son who ran away was not a bad kid. He just felt unsafe and he was running away. And so these behaviors are so automatic that if we try to address them very directly, it often doesn't work very well, because it's just not under their control. And instead, you have to do things like help their bodies feel better, make the environment more supportive, figure out what skills they may not have so that they can learn to feel better about the world they're operating in. What does it look like when you are getting out of control? So I talked about that fight or flight mode. So the kinds of things that can happen when you're in that mode of dysregulation is maybe your voice will get higher. You start getting a little squeakier or something like that. You may talk faster. Your heart may pound. Your breathing will be shallow and rapid. Your skin will flush. You'll sweat a lot, and your tummy will stop digesting, so you may feel like you have butterflies in your tummy. So these are all things that happen because your sympathetic system is activated and you're ready to run or fight. And these are all things that support your ability to fight. Shutdown or freeze happens. What happens with that is you may not be able to hear. I did not understand this, but actually when you move into shutdown or freeze, your middle ear contracts. And so you may not be able to, that's one reason you can't process language when that starts happening, is it sounds like everything's a million miles away. I don't know if you've ever had that feeling of being so upset that it sounds like everything's really far away, but that is a physiological thing that happens to kids and adults when they're in shutdown. You can't process language, you can't understand what people are saying, and if they're trying to make you talk about something, so say, tell me what's going on, are you okay, what's wrong, or hey, you just need to do this, they're not going to be able to do that. And so they may look like they're being defiant, but they may not actually just be able to understand you. May have flat facial expressions. So what happens is all the muscles in your face are innervated actually by the brain system that helps you think. And so your jaw muscles and your tongue, your ability to control your mouth and so on, those signals are not getting through. So you'll just have this flat facial expression. You may not be able to control your voice. So you may have sort of a flat intonation like this. And your heart rate and breathing will slow, and you may soil yourself. So these are things that happen when your body really moves into a serious shutdown phase. See, it's not doing it. There it is. Okay, so things that you can look for from the outside in your kid to recognize that your kid's starting to feel dysregulated are things like, all right, the obvious ones, they express anger. So maybe they're way madder about something than the situation really seems to demand. And you're just like, that's a little extreme there. Or maybe they're just really flat, right? So the freeze kids would be kind of flat, but the fight or flight might be really freaked out. Some kids report feeling numb or disconnected or dissociated from the situation. In the autism community, they talk about this feeling of dissociation. So that's something that can happen. You can also have low energy. So if you're anxious or depressed, you may have a hard time getting going on things. So that may be another sign that your nervous system's dysregulated, or trouble getting started. They might resist, getting started on something, or procrastinate or put something off. And that might be because they're scared to do it. So my older son actually really has a hard time when he is confronted with a long-term project that he has to do. He really shuts down, and he has a really hard time, no matter how much we break it down, he has a hard time getting going on it because he's so freaked out about all the work. Maybe they'll have a lack of confidence and feel like they can't engage, or they'll have trouble focusing. They'll have racing thoughts and things like that. You may see that they're having sleep issues, trouble sleeping, not getting enough sleep, or sleeping way, way, way too much. These are all signs that something's up for your kid. And maybe burnout, exhaustion, just feeling overwhelmed. These are all signs that your nervous system is getting dysregulated. So these are not oppositional behaviors. That's one of the things that I just want you to come away from this with, is that these behaviors are a sign that your nervous system is not responding to the situation in the most ideal way. So this is a wheel that my friend Penny and I came up with as part of the behavior revolution. And when I talked about the thinking brain, that is the calm, connected zone where you feel safe and regulated. And in that mode, you can see you feel calm, you feel curious, you feel connected and collaborative, loving, relaxed, content, social, present and engaged, laughing, confident, peaceful, thoughtful. These are all things that you will see in your child. However, as they move into feeling less safe, so all those things are possible when you feel safe and socially connected. But if you start feeling unsafe, where your body is starting to perceive danger, maybe in the environment, maybe with the people you're with, maybe something going on inside, you'll start seeing behaviors like fight or flight. They may act stressed, or they need to move or run around, fidgeting, fighting, being defensive. Penny's daughter used to do this thing she called the mother hen, where she just started trying to make everybody do things the way she needed them to do them, and tried to control every little thing. Acting agitated or frantic, or jumping out of your skin, or just feeling a need to move, or being tense. And then as you shift into that shutdown, so this is the fight or flight zone here. As you move into the shutdown zone, where your body is perceiving that there's a life threat, it's very unpleasant, or freeze, then you're going to see kids who look numb or disoriented or immobile, rigid or floppy, collapsed. They might freeze. They look like they're avoiding something, but they may just be frozen. Terror, deer in the headlights. Some kids, suicidal ideation, or dissociated from the situation. So these are the kinds of signals you will see in a kid who has moved into that shutdown zone. And, just as you go through these different things, you can recover, but you have to go back around the other direction. You don't just go from shut down to calm and connected. So, there was a video I watched that showed this so clearly, where a lion was attacking a gazelle, and the gazelle started out by, taking its hooves and fighting actually it started by running, then the lion caught up with it. It started fighting with its hooves. Then the lion really went in for it, and it looked like things were not going to go well for the gazelle, and the gazelle collapsed and just, passed out. And then something distracted the lion ran away, and the gazelle lay there for a minute, and then it kind of got up, and then it kind of shook its whole body, And then it got up and ran away as if nothing had happened. But that part where it was like shaking its body and kind of getting its awareness back, that was it moving back through this activated zone and back down into the calm and connected zone. So that's something that can be hard to remember, is that, you know, as kids move in and out of these things, they may have these behaviors. So what do you do when your child doesn't feel safe? It's important to remember, as I said earlier, that disruptive behavior is a signal that your child is feeling unsafe. So if you see these kinds of behaviors I was just talking about, you think about, how can I help them feel safe? And one of the things we talked about in the Brenda Smith-Miles Rumble Rage Recovery Cycle was this idea of you as a parent being calm so that your child can borrow your calm. A metaphor that I really just love, I got this from Jackie Flynn, who's a therapist who does a lot of play therapy workshops. And she talks about being the thermostat. So what you want to do is set the emotional tone for what's going on in the room, not the thermometer, which is reflecting what's going on in the room, right? You want to be the person who's helping everybody get back down to calm and regulated. So think how you can be the thermostat rather than the thermometer. So I talked about this Rumble Rage Recovery Cycle, and one of the things I talked about is when your thinking brain goes offline, then talking doesn't work. And this is something a lot of people do, is they see a kid starting to lose it and they start talking to them, that you're like, oh, you just need to do this, or what's wrong, or, you know, whatever. And so you can talk, but they're not listening. So you make it worse when you try to talk to your kids, because very often they're trying to get it back together and they want to talk to you and they know you want that from them, but they can't do it. And so that demand, that perceived demand, can be very dysregulating for them. So just try to remember to not talk when you see a kid in the Rumble Rage or recovery part of that cycle. One of my favorite go-to strategies is empathizing. So I don't like it when people yell at me either. You can just say that to your kid if they seem dysregulated. Validating is really important. So you can say things when they say, I just don't want to go to school today. And you can say, I have days where I dread going to work too. And I remember when I was younger, I had days when I was scared to go to school. So often we think we need to counter whatever it is they're feeling, but sometimes when they just know that these feelings are feelings everyone has, then it makes them feel better and they can recover more quickly. You can also acknowledge what you're seeing in them. I can see how hard it is for you to go to school. So they know that you see them, you understand they're having a rough time. These are all really helpful strategies. So I'm seeing that part of the problem is it just doesn't update very quickly when I click my mouse. Okay, another thing, we talked about being the thermostat and not the thermometer. So co-regulate with your kids. Let them borrow your calm. I talked about that earlier, how when you're connecting with your kid, and you're feeling calm, even if they're feeling out of control, that actually helps them calm down faster. So these are strategies for managing a meltdown. Staying calm, I talked about that just now, showing empathy. This one I didn't really talk about, but if you can just take a minute and a breath and respond to what you see as opposed to reacting to what you see. So I find that if I'm feeling really upset about something and my kids are losing their marbles, then if I can just take a breath and think, okay, how do I want to respond to this? Just don't feel like you have to respond right away and be a little more thoughtful about it, then that can be helpful. I talked about the importance of stop talking and also honoring what your child needs. So sometimes kids will tell you what they need. Remember, I said during recovery, sometimes kids want you to give them a hug. Other kids want to be left alone. I remember this parent I was working with, and I felt so bad. The mom was trying to be, loving and give her daughter a hug when her daughter was feeling bad. And her daughter was pushing her away and saying, "Get away from me, get out of here, leave me alone." And she wouldn't. She was trying to be a nice mom. And so she had this video of her daughter like beating her, really. And I said, "Well, what happens if you do walk out?" And she said, "Oh, well, my daughter calms down right away." I said, "Well, she probably doesn't want you to give her a hug right then." And so this is a case of knowing your child. So if your kid needs you to be there with them, then do your best to try to be there with them. And if they don't want you there with them, that's okay. It doesn't mean they don't love you. It just means that they need something different. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how to build a safe environment for your child. So make sure your child feels seen, heard, and understood. Okay, so this was getting to that validating that I was talking about earlier. So just knowing that you really get who they are, you really understand who they are and what they need and what's awesome about them, what's hard, for them, and when you see them working really hard. If they're telling you something, like this little girl who's telling her mom, go away, then if you can hear that without taking it personally, I actually have a little parenting mantra I love, which is called Q-tip, which is for quit taking it personally, because very often your kid is trying to tell you what they need. And so if you can hear them without having your own reaction to it, very often that's super helpful. And also just if your kid feels understood, that the way they experience the world may be different than how you are experiencing the world or how their best friend is experiencing the world. So just understanding that they may have a different experience. I did just click the button, but it's taking its time. The next one is, boy, is it slow. Okay, there we go. So the next one is making sure your kid knows you value them just as they are. You're not trying to fix them. You love them just as they are. And sometimes they have bad days and sometimes they have good days, but you think they're awesome just the way they are. And that's a really important message for a kid to hear. Another one of my favorite things to think about in terms of things you can change to help your child feel safe is thinking about the language you use, because it can matter. It matters to your kid, and it also matters to you in how you're thinking about the situation. So the first strategy I love is slowing down. So in our go, go, go world that we live in right now, very often we need to be getting places really fast. And the thing is little kids don't process language as fast as we do as adults. And kids with neurological differences may have slow processing speeds, which means that they need more time to process what you're saying for them. So something I have learned to do with my kid is to say one thing and then just stop. And a friend of mine taught me this strategy where she actually puts her finger over her mouth to remind herself to stop talking. So she'll just put her finger right there in front of her mouth to remind herself to pause and give her child time to process and figure out what they're going to say. The second strategy I love is one that I learned as an RDI consultant called declarative language, using declarative language. So one of the things that happens when our kids aren't responding as quickly as we want them to, or maybe they have language processing issues, is we shift into this mode of asking a ton of questions. What did you do at school today? What was your favorite thing? What did you eat for lunch? What did your science teacher say? What do you want to wear today? Like, we're asking them a ton of questions. And the thing about that is that it triggers these feelings of there's a right or wrong answer. So if I have to come up with what was my favorite thing I learned today, well, I learned 4 things I liked. I don't know which was my absolute favorite. And then they get kind of stuck and they can't answer. Or we just tell them what to do. We're telling them all the time, do this, do that, put on your shoes, put on your socks, put on your shoes, put on your coat, put on your hat. And if you can do things to cue them to think for themselves instead of telling them what to do, that gives them that sense of agency that I was talking about. So coaching and encouraging your children to think for themselves is really important. There's a really great book by Linda Murphy, and it's this tiny little volume, and it's called The Declarative Language Handbook. And it's truly one of my very favorite resources for understanding why, declarative language is important, and then real good concrete strategies for using declarative language. Super helpful. Collaborating is also really helpful. So collaborating with your child gives them, again, this sense of agency. It shows your child that their input matters, and that they can trust you to actually value their opinion about things. This is more helpful with older kids, but even little kids enjoy feeling like they have some control over their environment. Fostering independence. So we want our kids to learn how to solve problems for themselves. And when you collaborate with them to show them how to do things, but also to get their ideas about what they want to do, that helps build their problem solving skills. And it provides a framework to work through intense emotions. My favorite resource for that is Ross Green, who has this website called livesinthebalance.org, and he talks about collaborative and proactive solutions, and he has videos and strategies for how to collaborate with your child in a way that really works. It's also important to remember that if your child is in a situation where they can't be successful, there's an emotional impact of repeated failure. And so just recognize that if your kid has never felt successful at doing something, it's going to be hard for them to get back up on that horse and try it again, and especially when it's happened over and over and over again. Another thing I like to think about is what in RDI we call the just right challenge. So Lev Vygotsky was this Russian psychologist, and he had this idea of what he called the zone of proximal development. And what that actually means is that's the just right challenge. So there are things you can do, with your eyes closed, right? Like most of us can, walk from our bed to the bathroom without thinking about it at all. That's something you can do without any thought or attention at all. And then there are other things that you are never going to be able to do, or maybe you can't do right now. So for me, that would be, doing cartwheels to the door or something like that. I'm just not going to be able to do that. But the zone of proximal development is something that might be a little hard, but you can do it if somebody just helps you figure out how to do it. And so for me, that might be dancing to the door or something, using a dance step or something like that. So I could do it if I worked on it and somebody showed me what I needed to do. But having that just right challenge helps kids feel like they have a sense of agency, and they can actually solve hard problems, and you can build that desire for solving problems because it isn't too hard, but it's something that does make them work. So giving them those just right challenges where it's not too hard and not too easy helps them build that sense of competence. And so what you can do as a parent or a teacher is tailor the activities that you have kids do, so that you know that they'll have to think about it really hard, but they can probably get through it and make it work. So you also want to set them up for success. You want to nurture their talents and interests by offering them the opportunity to explore those through activities, classes, volunteer work, or whatever. You want to provide the tools and support necessary so that they can meet the expectations you have at home and school. So all these strategies I was just talking about. Setting doable expectations based on where your kid is, not on their chronological age. So if all 8-year-olds can do something, that doesn't mean your 8-year-old can do that. So you want to make sure you set doable expectations based on their ability. Offering your child that sense of control and decision making as much as possible, and just believing that they can do it. So having that faith that your kid is going to learn to do it may be hard for them, but you have faith that they can. And this is one of my favorite things. This is from our Manifesto of the Neurodiverse family. But just remember that we are all complex. We are all beautifully complex, and we are all marvelously imperfect. So if you could just remember, you're that way, your kid's that way, everybody has their own complex constellation. And I mentioned that manifesto of the neurodiverse family. So this is the manifesto, and you'll notice that some of those slides I had these. You can download this and just put it on your wall. I actually have it on my wall over there under my light. I don't know if you can see that, but I have it up there. And these just kind of keep your mindset where it needs to be. So that is the end. Oh, I forgot to say on that last one, if you go to thebehaviorrevolution.com, you can just download this for free from there. So, all right, so now I'm moving to questions.
Dr. Wayland, thank you so much for an outstanding presentation on having a sense of safety. We are a small group. Hold on, I want to just put the behaviorrevolution.com in the chat for people. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to unmute now and ask your question or make your comment or share some information in the chat. Ms. Summerlot says no questions, but thank you for the presentation. It was power-packed, full of concepts and information, really very informative.
It was kind of a fire hose.
I didn't say that.
You didn't, but I was thinking it. So.
It was amazing and outstanding. I also put in the chat the ongoing sessions that we're having for the conference and the website, which there is a vendor page. There are vendor pages for more resources and information about community-based programs that work with individuals with disabilities, information about disabilities, and the like. Again, Dr. Wayland, any closing thoughts while anybody thinking of their last questions? Betty Atkins says, thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome. This particular presentation, it took me a really long time to understand that this actually matters as much as it does. And one of the places I realized it mattered was when I was at the dinner table. So when we're at the dinner table and we're just all chatting, about our day or whatever, I realized that my kids were always like very socially engaged. They're both autistic. And so they have trouble with, some of the social pieces of interacting with other people. But for some reason, when we were at the dinner table, they just didn't have trouble with it. So they were very reciprocal. They were always listening to what I said and responding. They would look at me while we were talking. And I started realizing that when they feel safe, they actually don't have a lot of these social challenges that they have. And I started realizing that sense of safety really is it's the foundation for everything. And without it, you really can't develop those skills that you need to develop. And so it really is that foundation.
Yes, and there's so many hidden parts to youth, individuals with disabilities. So I really appreciated what you shared. How it looks on the surface may not be what's really going on.
Yeah.
And so how we respond, I really learned a lot about how we respond can affect how the other person reacts.
Yeah. Yep.
So.